Welcome to the History Slam podcast from ActiveHistory.ca. Here's your host, Sean Graham.
Thank you, Adam. Welcome to the History Slam, everybody. I am Sean Graham, coming at you today nearly live from Ottawa, Ontario, Congress 2015 and the Canadian Historical Association annual meeting. And who better to talk to at the Canadian Historical Association annual meeting than the Executive Director of the Canadian Historical Association, Michel Duquet. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for asking me to be here and talk about Congress.
Yeah, I mean, Congress is always a fun time of year, and we do this recap every year. And why not get the information from the head of the organization as to what happens at Congress? So for you personally, as the person who is the executive director of the Canadian Historical Association, what is this week like for you? Well,
I think most of the work, as with any other event, most of the work is done prior to arriving, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But so basically, what I do before we get here is that I get in touch with very early. We started this last fall to get in touch with the program chair so that the process goes as smoothly as possible. So we've been involved since last fall.
But when you show up here, you show up on campus at least Sunday because the CHA room was open Sunday. So
right.
You're here, you're setting a presence. Do you have the opportunity to go to panels? Are you visiting with people? Are you mostly sort of networking and talking to people or talking with other organizations that are here? Like a day in the life of Congress for you, what is that like?
Well, unfortunately, I don't have much time, in spite of the fact that I'm an historian myself, to go to panels, unfortunately. Right. So we have an office here to welcome our participants, and this year we were here in record numbers, as you know.
Yes. What did the final number end up being?
605 people.
Oh, wow.
Registered. So it's quite amazing because our previous record was 499 in Montreal in 2010. So we're quite pleased about that. In spite of the uncertainties about history these days, and in an era of anti-intellectualism and questions about the profession. And I mean, it's been debated in some of the program this year. So we're quite pleased. So what we do basically is welcome members to our annual meeting and putting out fires. So that any problems there is with rooms, participants, and such. But we also organize the AGM within our annual meeting, as you know, and then the prize ceremonies. And this year was just even more special because Dominique gave her presidential address as well yesterday. That's basically it. Coordinate things, last minute requests and such. That's our job.
And I, for anyone who's never been here before, because the first time I was here, I was surprised. I thought it was just the CHA, but there's a lot going on campus this week to the extent that summer classes are canceled this week at the University of Ottawa, which, as someone who's taught a summer course at the University of Ottawa, I would very much have appreciated a week off in the middle of the summer semester last year, because the Congress takes up the whole of campus. You have the Book Expo, which is taking place in the gym, and the various associations are all over campus. And, what sort of interactions go on between the member associations? Obviously, we have some joint panels with other associations, and that would be done by the program committee or the various program committees. But for you, I mean, do you have a lot of interactions with other groups to try to coordinate maybe social events or to figure out the logistics of just having the space and where everyone's going to be?
Well, again, unfortunately, even though the idea of Congress is to get like-minded associations, interacting and this and that. Given that our program especially is so busy, we had 131 sessions this year over 3 days. So you can imagine that most of our members don't have time to interact, nor do we. So all that work of coordinating events with other associations is done beforehand, so that once we're here, we basically CHA 24/7.
Okay.
And there's not much time to interact with Congress nor other associations.
And what about the Federation of Social Sciences and Humanities, who puts on Congress? What are your dealings with them? Because obviously I'm assuming they're the ones who assign where each association has. I mean, the CHA stuff is here in Des Marais, which is where the history department is here at the University of Ottawa. So I assume, though, that the Federation says, all right, this association is going to be here, these people are going to be here. So what sort of interaction do you have with them? Maybe not just so much this week, but in the lead-up, in the organization process. I mean, how much do you have to coordinate with that organization to make sure everything goes off smoothly?
We work in concert with the Federation, but most importantly, in terms of room allocation, it's the university who looks after that. And they interact with the Federation so that it's a complicated process, as you can imagine. 8,000 people come in on campus and try to find a space where we want. So there's lots of organization in the months leading to Congress, and we're thrilled to be located in one spot. I think that's the main issue that we face every year, is to have all our sessions in one building.
Right.
And we've achieved that this year, being in the most state-of-the-art building on campus. So we couldn't be more happy. So that
the faculty of social science would probably argue with you on that, because their building's 2 years old. But
True.
They might argue with you, but this is a really good, especially compared to where the history department used to be.
Right.
This is great. This is great.
I agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So. Yeah. Yes, a lot of coordination happens, and Congress is making an effort to reach out to the public, so that in that context, anything that we wanted to highlight, they were more than willing to add it to their own program, so that things of interest in the public eye presently would have been great news for them. And then we certainly did give them a lot of information about sessions that we thought would be of particular interest to the public at large, and that's what we did.
And we mentioned that we're here in Des Marais. Was that something, are you allowed to request an area? I mean, because there's a natural connection for the CHA to be here, just given that the history department's here. Of course, the history department is not the only department in this building. So is that something that you had to ask for, or is it just a stroke of luck that the university said, well, we'll put the CHA there? I mean, what was that process like? We're
not involved in that process, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
We can request specific buildings, and I'm also president of the Canadian Association of Learned Journals, and we're a small organization. We had our meeting on Saturday and Sunday, and months prior to Congress, we visited a specific building and chose a specific room for our meeting, and we didn't get what we wanted.
Right.
So, end result, that's the way it was. And I think the CHA being so big, it does help into what the university does with us in terms of our meetings. But we have no part in the decision-making process, unfortunately.
But you're right, it has worked out well that it is in one space, and one space that can accommodate various sizes of sessions. Because I remember last year at Brock, the space where the panels were was good. I mean, it was this one building. You could go room to room pretty quickly, and the classrooms were big enough for panels. But for the larger events, we had to traipse over to another building, which wasn't all that convenient. And there was some grumbling by some folks. And so to have it all centralized here, that you can have the presidential address and the keynote in one room and then go upstairs to a smaller conference room for a session, it really has been quite fortunate. And in your experience at coming to these things, how often does that happen?
Rarely.
Yeah.
Is the short answer. And yeah, we are very happy this year, considering that we've had a record number of registrants this year. And I mean, you're right, and I think we've noticed bigger attendances at these sessions because it was all here, and it's a more convivial way of holding a meeting, having everything in one spot.
I mean, I guess the only downside to this location is that, I mean, the University of Ottawa isn't huge, but we're somewhat away from the Book Expo and the beer tent, and you can say which one of those two things is more important for people. But yeah, I mean, given the alternative of having to go from building to building, this is much, much better. And my sense has been that there's a lot more discussion going on outside the panels, because you can sort of stand there for 10 or 15 minutes afterwards and not be late for another one if you want to see it. So, it's a very congenial atmosphere, and I don't know if it's more relaxed because of it, but there isn't people rushing off in 40 different directions the way it has been in the past.
No, we couldn't be more happy than what happened here this year.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you're right about choosing, logging people from one place to the next doesn't really work in terms of building some sort of momentum,
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, to start up discussions and in between sessions, we were thrilled to know that we were here for the duration.
Yeah. So you mentioned the record number of people, 605 people registered, which is amazing. I would guess that the fact that it's in Ottawa helps because people can piggyback on Congress and do research. Those who do Canadian history that require the use of Library and Archives Canada can piggyback on that and sort of get two things done at once. So I'm sure that helps. But that being said, Congress was at Carleton in 2009, and the previous record wasn't Carleton in 2009. So maybe I'm projecting a little too much in that. But I'm wondering, what sort of efforts does the CHA take to attract people to Congress? I mean, I know for graduate students, it's been presented to us as, here's your chance. Come meet faculty members, people who you've read, and get your work heard by people, and get feedback, those sorts of things. But for established faculty members, what's the pitch to them to get them to come to Congress every year?
Well, you've talked about outreach. Since 2009, when we held Congress at Carleton, we've made great efforts to reach out to the public historians, because it's a segment of the profession who's growing, and people are more interested in on the necessity, because universities are not hiring professors these days, so that we have to find another conduit for doing research. And this year we've had, for example, 21 archivists from LAC registering for Congress.
Wow.
So we wouldn't have never had that in the past if we hadn't reached out to public historians. In the same vein, we are deeply involved with the Canada Hall at the Canadian Museum of History, and that interaction with them has produced, a good relationship. And there are 8 or 9 of those historians working there here this week. So I think that the CHA has done purposefully more outreach activities to reach out to historians who would have traditionally avoided the CHA annual meeting, and I think it paid off this year.
And I think it's sort of like you mentioned, a larger trend in the profession that is going away from the pure academics. And there's a variety of reasons. You mentioned the lack of hiring at universities, but also there's increased opportunity for public history, I find, in a digital world, and people are taking advantage of that. And you just look at the people from No History who are here, No spelled K-N-O-W, History who are here, and the work that they're doing not only consulting, but some interesting digital work and some outreach work. So these sorts of organizations are cropping up, and it's, I don't know if it's a popularization of the profession, but it's definitely not limited to academics the way it was even the first time I came. It's definitely noticeable that there's a greater diversity of people here.
Absolutely.
Which is it's fun too for me, because I'm still in university settings most of the time, and to see these people, and some of whom I know, like Jean-François Lausier has been here from the museum, and some of the people from public history who I know who have been here. It's really cool, and you had the curators from the museum in Winnipeg, the Human Rights Museum, who came in. So it's really an interesting time in the profession that the CHA is reflecting that in who is showing up to this thing is great.
No, absolutely. And as you know, there's a lot of questioning about the profession, and it's reflected in the program. And I've attended 2 this morning that I was thankfully able to attend, and one on the difference between women and men publishing in history, which those statistics was quite shocking, in fact. And then there was another questioning about history pre-Confederation, who killed it?
Right.
Because if you look at the programs of the CHA in the past 20 years, there's definitely a trend for that, where 20th century historians dominate. And there were questions about that, the lack of long thinking in terms of history, and thinking that, we live in a perpetual present. And I think historians don't escape that idea that everything starts now.
Right.
So now it's quite interesting, and the keynote speaker, Dean Oliver from the museum, also touched on the issue of, what do we do now as a profession?
Right.
And I think that it's all reflected in the program, and the people coming here questioning what's happening. And I think it's a great opportunity. Like you mentioned, public history is booming, and I think we're taking advantage of that.
So, I mean, a lot of people know the CHA, or know the CHA from Congress, and obviously this is the major event on the calendar for the CHA, and a main focus for you. But I think a lot of people don't or aren't aware of some of the other work that the CHA does through the year, because this isn't an organization that exists purely for 3 days a year. So what are some of the other main priorities that you have through the year that go along with or that are outside of the Congress?
Well, we have a journal that's published twice a year. 2 issues, one of which is on non-Canadian themes. So that I'm sure that 90%, well, I wouldn't say maybe that much, but a large proportion of members don't know that we publish an issue of our journal dedicated to non-Canadian history. So we try to get away from the idea that, yes, the CHA is a home for Canadian historians, but no, it's not all about Canadian history. So that we're doing a lot of efforts into that and trying to reach out to historians in general. We do organize an annual history department chairs meeting, again with the same idea for the CHA to be a central point for chairs to discuss issues that they're facing, declining enrollments and priorities that are given to them by universities or faculties. We also publish a bulletin 3 times a year, again with the idea of historians being able to communicate and share ideas and about issues that they all face. And I think we've made great progress in the last few years in this regard. And then we do a lot of advocacy work. I mentioned the fact that the Canadian Museum of History reached out to the CHA for us to have representatives on their committees to discuss what could go into the hall.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that the CHA will endorse whatever it's produced, but the idea of having consulting professional historians, CHA delegates, to discuss what was going to go into the hall is a great step forward, and I think it reflects well on what the CHA does. And in the same vein, we've been in contact, almost constant contact with LAC about the many issues that historians have as the main clients of LAC over the years. And I will tell you that Mr. Berthiaume's appointment a few months ago has made a big difference in the sort of relationship that we have with them. And I think that they are listening to what the CHA is saying. So the executive has had many discussions with LAC over the last few months, and we're one of the major stakeholders with LAC. And Monsieur Berthiaume's visit at the CHA annual meeting yesterday, I think, emphasized that.
And as someone who is at Library and Archives Canada regularly, even when I'm not doing research, I wrote my dissertation on the second floor because it was a quiet space. And now the second floor is completely different. They took out all the stacks, which kind of bothered me because I would hide in the corner. And now you can't hide in the corner over there. But, it's true that there are issues with Library and Archives Canada that need to be addressed, and the historian's voice in that does need to be present. And because, obviously we're not the sole users of Library and Archives Canada, but we are a principal user of Library and Archives Canada, and that the CHA can advocate. And obviously each of us are going to have different uses for Library and Archives Canada individually when we go, but en masse we're trying to do similar things. And we want access to stuff, and we want the resources there that we can do our jobs effectively, and that we have this organization advocating for that is a good thing. Now, in your answer there, you reminded me of something I wanted to ask you, that the issue of the journal that is dedicated to non-Canadian issues. There were some lamentations on Twitter last week about the fact that there are very few non-Canadianists presenting this week, as part of the CHA. Now, the CHA is supposed to be for all historians in Canada and those studying Canada outside of Canada. Like, that's the idea of it. Yet, there is a distinct lack of non-Canadian topics here. How do you and one of the explanations that was given on Twitter was that there are other places for people who don't study Canada to go where they might get more out of the whole conference experience. How do you try to combat that and really have the program of the CHA be reflective of the historical work that is being done in this country?
Well, you're right. I mean, you mentioned one of the biggest obstacles that we're facing is that all of those non-Canadianists belong to other associations and who are more pertinent to their research. So they want to hear others, what they're doing, other researchers' work and all that. So that's one reason. We have a lower number of non-Canadianists attending. Another issue is that the journal organizes 5 panels a year on non-Canadian subjects. Mm-hmm. This year there was a bit of an issue, so I think we may have a few less than usual. But the other issue, and that we're realizing that, and we try to combat it as much as we can, is that people don't attend as much as they would other sessions.
Right.
Because, most people here are Canadianists. Mm-hmm. But one of our main efforts in this sense is that we have created the second issue just in 2006 or 7, if I believe correctly, for that purpose, to attract non-Canadianists with the hope, and even though all the panelists and all the communication presentations go through a rigorous peer review process, but the idea is that we can create a pool to choose from, and they are guaranteed, if they are chosen, a publication within a year, which you won't find.
Right. That's
elsewhere.
Pretty good.
It's very good.
It's pretty good.
So I think we've done that with the idea of welcoming more non-Canadianists, and I think that from year to year it does vary, but we're hoping that we'll have more in Calgary next year.
Well, and then I guess the other issue that has to be addressed is the issue of language. And, in Ottawa, there's a very strong bilingual contingent here in the University of Ottawa because it's a bilingual university. So it's something that I'm just used to being around. But I know the year we were, in Victoria, maybe there was a little less or fewer presentations given in French than there are this year, just proximity reasons. And I don't know if there's an expectation that there would be a 50-50 split. I don't know if that's reasonable, just given the number of universities in this country, Francophone schools versus English schools. And for as much as there are public historians now, the bulk of presentations are still or the majority of them are still being done by faculty members at universities. What proportion of material would you like to see in French? Or how do you integrate more Francophone historians or get them to present in a situation where, similar to the non-Canadianists, there might be concerns about attendance to Francophone sessions?
We're well aware of the issue. I think somebody mentioned there were 13% of papers in French at this annual meeting, and as you say, because it's in Ottawa, it helps a lot, of course. Now, the main issue that we have is that l'IHF exists, so Francophone historians in Canada, they have their own association.
Right.
Their annual meeting is in the fall, so if somebody's working on presenting something, they are used to that calendar, the fall calendar, as opposed to the one in the spring.
Right.
So what we've done to help with this situation is that recently, and it has to be a two-way street as well. For a while, I think the presidents of the past EHIF weren't maybe as keen to establish a relationship with the CHA, but I think this has changed in the last few years. So what we've done so far is organize panels, joint panels between the CHA and the EHIF. We presented a paper in the fall of last year. We will present another one at the next EHIF Congress in the fall. So just as a first step, to create an awareness that the CHA is here and operates in both languages. And in terms of our own annual meeting, I think we've tried to integrate maybe not having whole sessions in French because nobody comes or fewer people come. But I think that if we integrate one paper, let's say, and then the other two are in English, I think it attracts more people, and I think that it can work quite well.
Right, and I think the conversation between Francophone historians and Anglophone historians is important as well, because oftentimes there's an isolation between the two, and just the preponderance of books and articles now that say in English Canada or in French Canada. I mean, there doesn't seem to be that conversation going on between the two languages, and if you can integrate and have truly bilingual panels, and this is something in this town that bothers me when we talk about bilingualism, but really it's two sets of unilingualism, and so it doesn't really foster any bilingual. But if you can have a truly bilingual panel where there's two presentations in French, one in English, or vice versa, I mean, that really can spark that conversation that has larger ramifications that go beyond what happens in that room, in that panel.
No, absolutely, and I think some are aware that we live in two different cultures, as historians, because we don't have the same way of looking at history, and the markers are not the same.
Right.
We talked this morning about pre and post Confederation. Historians in Quebec don't think in terms of Confederation because, rightly or wrongly, think that this date doesn't count as much as, let's say, the Royal Proclamation in 1763.
Right.
So that when they talk about, rather than saying they talk about Confederation, they talk about the 19th century. So that, the vista of looking at things is different. So there's the language barrier, and there's also, I think, the structural barrier between the two. And but I think that it can work. It just takes an effort to do it, and I think the CHA is dedicated to bridge that gap.
And I guess just my final question for you is, I've been coming to this thing for 4 years. How do you get good weather every year? In Waterloo, it was 27 degrees and bright and sunny every day. Victoria was bright and sunny. Come on. And then last year at Brock, I think it rained the Monday morning as we drove to St. Catharines. And I don't know if it rained in St. Catharines, but it rained as we drove to St. Catharines. And then it was nice the rest of the week. And then this week, sure, Monday and Tuesday were a little cool, maybe a little overcast. It's great weather for somebody like me who hates the sun. But then today's a nice day. I mean, how do you do this?
You do good things, and good things will happen.
Well, thank you very much for doing this. That's Michel Duquet, Executive Director of the Canadian Historical Association. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sean.
All right, and we continue with our Congress recap. The CHA portion has literally just ended, about, 45 minutes ago or something. And we are here with Benoit Longval, a graduate student here at the University of Ottawa. He is doing his comps, which is a fun experience.
Exhausting.
Yeah, but it's cool that you get to go to Congress during your comps, because now you get to see people who you've been reading and meet them in person, and you're in this process where you're exploring a lot of different ideas. And to a certain degree, that's what the CHA and Congress is all about.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting about it as well is not only does it allow me to somewhat reflect on the possibility for my research that, I'm going to have to write a proposal eventually.
Yeah.
But also in sense of future contacts to who I will be talking with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something really important. If you can have, even if it is a small community of people who will be interested in your research and maybe give you feedback eventually.
Sure. Or even like something as tangible as a possible future external examiner.
Exactly.
These sorts of things, they matter.
So, great opportunity, even though, again, I did not present anything this year. I think the experience was worthwhile.
So, we were talking, and for me, this being a home game of sorts has been beneficial in that we've been able to do a lot more podcasting than we have other years. But also meant that I couldn't go to as many panels as I have in the past because there was other things that I had to do that went along with. I wasn't on the host committee or anything, but just having it be in your town, that there's certain other things that you have to do. So for you, though, I mean, what did you get to see, and did you get to see everything you wanted to see?
Definitely not everything that I wanted to see. Not only because I believe our program was very interesting, but we had 9 panels running most of the time. On this last day, we had 10 at some time slots. So obviously I had to make some difficult choices.
Yeah.
But I am very happy with what I saw. I know that a lot of people were happy that a lot more public history was present on this year's program. We mentioned the mini conference on Aboriginal history. So I don't know if you want me to go into the specifics of what I really...
Well, no, what about like highlights? What was sort of like something that really, when you're thinking about it now that it's over, I mean, is there something that really jumps out at you that really stood out as being either well done or interesting or something that you might even be able to integrate into your own stuff?
There was a panel that I thoroughly enjoyed because it is somewhat related to what I plan on studying. And it was, I don't have the exact title, but a panel on, it was Storming the Ivory Tower. So a panel on historiography in the early 20th century. And while I plan on doing more post-Second World War historiography, a lot of it raised important issues about the work of English-Canadian historians and how they approach not only their craft, but also Canadian life in general, and how the Canadian national impulse, if you want, found its way into their work. And I was talking earlier about people who you might be able to communicate with and exchange. I believe I took the names down to make sure that whatever, like I'll send my research to them or email them eventually. So that was a really interesting one.
And I think that's hard for a lot of grad students, particularly younger grad students. I mean, you're just finishing your first year in the PhD. I know for me, you come here and you make these contacts. It's that follow-up that is tough because it's very intimidating to do that.
Yeah.
So that you were able to make those contacts and be in a position where these people would be open to you furthering a conversation, that's really good and something productive for you.
It is, and I believe the conference is probably the best place to do it because as much as there are the database of dissertations or whatnot, I cannot know what everyone is working on. So if they're not established, it can be so hard to know, for example, that there's a student at York or BC that is working on something very similar to me. Whereas if I can see a paper presented at a conference, now I know, wow, like there's someone who is looking at the same thing but in a completely different way. Right. So I think the conference really is a great opportunity for that.
And we should point out that you might be the only person to have ever said that the historiography panel was their favorite. I
indeed very well might be.
I mean, historiography.
You know what? I attended at least 2. Like I attended a second panel this afternoon on a book called On Historical Distance, which I've yet to read, but I want to read it so bad because basically it was a roundtable, and each participant was giving its take on the book, and they made a really great job of making that book seem interesting. So definitely read it. And the author said that his intention when writing this book are all contained in his introduction. So if anyone is interested on that book on historical distance, you can read the first 15 pages, he says, and the essence of the book is there. So there you have it. For people who don't like historiography.
Right. Just get the 15 pages, you're done with it. My kind of book right there. Just you're done. That's the type of book that you love on your comp list. Too. Yeah. Just you can read the intro, you got it, and I'm done. So you mentioned that was a roundtable, that one, and you've been to panels. I'm interested as someone who, this is your first time at the CHA, you've been involved with the Pierre Savard conference here. So it's not like this is the first time ever at a conference, first time at one of this scale. What are your thoughts on the differences between the roundtable format and the panel format? And did you, or if you even noticed, and did you enjoy one more than the other, and did you think one was more productive than the other?
To be honest, I was surprised in a way that the roundtables were not so different from the panels. At least the ones I went to were not so much a discussion, but really people had prepared, and it might have been on the same topic or an issue, but they had prepared a paper, were presenting it, and then there were questions. Whereas the format that we had at Pierre Savard was really the facilitator or someone asking questions, and it encourages exchange, and I believe that is something that the CHA should look into. And also the rooms do not facilitate such an event, because we've seen with this wonderful place that is Desmarais and all it's fixed furniture, that it is almost impossible to really have the panelists all facing the crowd and engaging with the audience in such a way that makes it easy for everyone.
Like I was in a room yesterday with what we call here our fishbowl rooms, which are by the elevators, and those are true seminar rooms, and they're good for a round table. The problem is that those rooms aren't particularly big.
Exactly.
And so it's hard to fit everyone in, so it gets uncomfortable in that regard. And you mentioned that the fixed furniture in the larger rooms, and I don't know if it'll come through on the recordings when we recorded the keynote and the presidential address, but those chairs, not only are they fixed, they're extremely loud and squeaky, and it's just really not conducive. I've never had to teach in one of those rooms, and I have to imagine that over the course of a semester gets incredibly annoying. So you're right. So the physical space doesn't really lend itself to roundtables that well, and I agree 100% that the roundtable, some of these things are misidentified as roundtables, that the participants, the panelists, speak for too long, that by the end of their remarks, you have 15 minutes left. And that's not really the point of a roundtable. I mean, I understand introductory remarks, but your introductory remarks probably shouldn't be 15 minutes each if you really want to foster a discussion.
Yeah.
And that's something that I'm always struck by, and it happens not every time. It happens a lot where you go to a roundtable and the chair says, all right, each person is going to take 5 minutes. And 5 minutes turns into 10, which turns into 15. And it always happens. And I was struck. We recorded one in Victoria a couple years ago. I can't remember even what it was about, but I edited it because the chair had a bell, like literally had a bell. And after I think it was 3 minutes were up, he rang the bell. And on the recording, you can hear the panelists getting upset with him that he's actually forcing them out. And one of them actually says, like, you used to be my student, you can't do this.
You can't cut me.
I was like, well, come on. I mean, like, you were given 3 minutes. Take your 3 minutes. And that's not just roundtables, too, by the way. I mean, the 20-minute limit on papers, people often go over that. It's just, I think it's more an issue for the conference as a whole and trying to keep people on time, which is very difficult, particularly in a roundtable format, because my favorite part of these things is the discussion. Like, to me, that's when especially when I'm presenting, the discussion is where, to me, the value is, because I've already done the work, and
that's where you can better your work is by getting comments. So if you only present your paper and walk out, there's really no point to it.
Right, there's no point of showing up. I mean, I could send an audio thing or do a video conference that way. I mean, I want that interaction.
And just to come back to the roundtables, I think it's interesting to the way they are presented. Is it a roundtable in between those 4 or 5 participants, or is it with the public? And I think that needs to be, in a sense, highlighted in their proposal.
It should be advertised, because we recorded one yesterday on sort of charitable organizations in the war, and it struck me in the room that I think they were speaking to each other a lot. And it was interesting because each paper did speak to each other, and I think they wanted to have a little more time for discussion than they ended up having, but I didn't leave that one feeling disappointed, whereas there have been other ones where it's clear that the papers don't speak to each other that closely.
Mm-hmm.
And the people are really, and the panelists are really hoping for discussion, but they just take too much time.
Yeah.
And that's where I leave disappointed.
And again, it might all be planning and the location. If, for example, you could take 2 time slots and have the papers presented and then a whole discussion on the papers.
Right.
If you are presenting an issue that could raise such an interest, maybe, but it is a big guess because there's nothing more awkward than sitting in that room with all the participants and no one asking any questions.
So now this is your first time. Next year's in Calgary, and the following year in Toronto. I mean, what are your thoughts about future ones? I realize this ended less than an hour ago, but that being said, do you think this is something that, you study Canadian history. Is this going to be maybe not an annual thing for you, but a regular thing?
Definitely regular, and as you said, probably not annual. It will vary according to my research and the amount of time I can put towards it.
Yeah.
But I do plan on presenting my research at the CHA for the sole purpose that I would like to bridge the 2 solitudes, as someone put it yesterday, that the 2 historiographical traditions of Canada do not meet, and he was so surprised, in a sense, to see what English-speaking historians were doing. The trends were different as well, so I think this is what I would like to do, and particularly because my research will be on English Canadian historians, so I will need you to criticize me heavily. But looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm. And we talked with Michel Duquet about this idea too of bringing the 2 groups together, and francophone, anglophone, and this really being a place where there should be conversation between the 2. And if you're part of that, that's terrific and something that needs to be done. And this year was a unique opportunity because it's in Ottawa, but we'll see what happens next year in Calgary.
Yeah, and I'm very curious because. I saw at the beginning of the conference, I believe Tom Peace put out a short blog post saying that we had around 30 papers presented in French compared to 3 in the previous year.
Yeah.
So you see that being in Ottawa has its advantage for that gap that can be bridged. Mm-hmm. I'm curious whether it will happen in Calgary or Toronto, and I'm not sure where next years are going to be, but we can work towards that.
And we'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. So we appreciate you doing this, Benoit Longval, graduate student here, University of Ottawa.
Thank you for having me.
So that's it for Congress 2015. It was fun. I enjoyed having it on my home turf, or at least my home turf for now, before I jet off to a new place. So my thanks to Michel Duquet. And if you have any questions, comments for the podcast, it's historyslam@gmail.com. Twitter is @Dr. Shawnee Fever. And if you're out and you see Enrico Palazzo, please say hi for him.
Thanks for listening to the History Slam podcast. Be sure to check out Active History for more features, articles, and be sure to subscribe on iTunes.